Marvel Studios is really starting to capture what makes the mutants so compelling, and X-Men '97 is proof of that. As I watch the series, I can't help but imagine how many of these storylines deserve to make their way into the Marvel Cinematic Universe. A great example is Magneto's new suit, which looks remarkably similar to the one Ian McKellen appears to be wearing in Doomsday. Even though Marvel Animation operates somewhat independently from Kevin Feige, I genuinely hope the show's success has a direct impact on the upcoming X-Men films. In my opinion, these stories explore conflicts that are far more emotional and layered than most of what we saw throughout the Fox era. Focusing on Apocalypse's origin as portrayed in the series, I think it creates a fascinating time paradox. The X-Men travel to the past intending to prevent Apocalypse from ever existing, yet they inadvertently become part of the very chain of events that pushes En-Sabah-Nur toward becoming the villain. The moment he discovers the celestial ship and realizes that his entire future has already been written, he understands that his destiny can't be changed. From a storytelling perspective, I think that idea works incredibly well. I also found the ending especially emotional, particularly because of Magneto's sacrifice, which even leaves you wondering if he actually dies before the episode is over. This new episode picks up exactly where the previous one left off. Kang unleashes a devastating attack using celestial-based technology, wiping out nearly everything in its path. Even though much of the army is destroyed, Magneto manages to shield both the X-Men and En-Sabah-Nur with his magnetic abilities. I also couldn't help thinking that Magneto may have just saved the life of the man who will eventually become Apocalypse, which is pretty ironic considering their entire mission was to stop that transformation from ever happening. After surviving the attack, En-Sabah-Nur demands answers. Charles Xavier reveals that they come from the future and explains that, in their time, mutants and humans coexist in a society that's vastly different from the one he knows. He also tells him about the immense celestial power they both sensed earlier, which appears to be coming from a nearby temple. That location ultimately turns out to be the celestial ship itself, the very source of the incredible power that will eventually draw En-Sabah-Nur in. While the group takes a moment to recover, Kang uses a psychic device similar to Cerebro to establish a mental connection with Charles Xavier. Visually, I thought this sequence was incredible, and I really hope we eventually see the MCU portray telepathy in a similar way. These conversations also make it clear that several members of the team are conflicted about changing history. Rogue, however, believes altering the past could prevent tragedies like the Genosha massacre and save Gambit, along with countless other mutants. Although Charles begins as the strongest voice against interfering with the timeline, he eventually comes around to the idea that turning En-Sabah-Nur into a hero might actually create a better future. Later on, Charles and Kang discover that the mysterious energy disrupting their powers is coming directly from the Celestials. At the same time, we learn that En-Sabah-Nur had already felt that cosmic connection while gazing at the stars earlier in the night. Personally, I still feel like I need to dive deeper into Apocalypse's relationship with the Celestials in the comics. When the group finally reaches the ship, En-Sabah-Nur seems to know exactly where he's going, while the X-Men immediately recognize it as the same vessel that exists in their future. Inside, they discover that history has already been recorded. The ship contains references to Magneto, Charles Xavier, and even En-Sabah-Nur himself obtaining the power of Apocalypse. That revelation convinces him that this is his true destiny, and that the time travelers were only trying to delay the inevitable. For him, seeing his future already laid out is all the proof he needs to embrace the role he was always meant to play. Finally, I really enjoyed the almost philosophical tone of the conversations between Charles, Magneto, and En-Sabah-Nur. They speak with a sense of gravitas that makes them feel almost godlike. That said, I do think Apocalypse's reaction after realizing he's been deceived feels a bit childish compared to the emotional complexity the series has been building around his origin. Even so, I believe this episode adds meaningful new layers to both Apocalypse and Charles Xavier, while also planting the seeds for future storylines involving Onslaught. In the end, En-Sabah-Nur fully embraces the power of the celestial ship and uses it to bring down Kang's empire. The moment that happens, Kang immediately realizes his plan has failed. As a fellow time traveler, his goal had always been to eliminate Apocalypse before he could reshape the future. Not just for mutant kind, but for humanity as a whole. Once he understands there's no longer any way to stop him, Kang accepts that his empire is finished and retreats using his signature armor. Before leaving, he abandons the mutants who had been fighting alongside him, characters that I believe are far more important to the X-Men universe than this episode lets on. It also made me think about the way the series uses Kang. I honestly believe X-Men 97 proves the character works much better as a master strategist who occasionally appears throughout different points in history, manipulating events from behind the scenes with advanced technology and an army made up of soldiers pulled from multiple time periods. To me, that's a far more compelling approach than simply turning him into another massive villain who goes head-to-head with every hero. It allows his influence to grow gradually until it eventually leads to a major cinematic event. In fact, I still think this version of Kang is much more interesting than the one we've seen in the Marvel Cinematic Universe so far. I feel the character is at his best when he's quietly pulling the strings from the shadows, using armies assembled from different timelines instead of serving as the latest endgame villain. Taking that approach lets his importance build naturally over time and makes future storylines much more exciting. The story reaches its climax when Apocalypse activates what is essentially a nuclear-level failsafe, unleashing total destruction around him. Because of this, most of the X-Men manage to return to their own time, but Charles Xavier and Magneto are left stranded in the past after Apocalypse's attack. Without a doubt, one of my favorite moments in the episode is Magneto's final stand. I thought it was one of the most epic scenes in the entire story. Magneto confronts Apocalypse head-on, hurling him away with his control over metal while simultaneously protecting Charles by surrounding him with a metallic shell that shields him from the blast. He then tries to stop the ship from exploding or collapsing altogether to prevent an even greater disaster. After the impact, it actually looks like he survives, crashing into the desert and giving the impression that he managed to save everyone. But then Apocalypse appears right behind him and delivers one final attack, completely disintegrating him. To me, the scene clearly presents this as Magneto's apparent death and serves as a truly heroic sacrifice. After witnessing everything, Charles is left emotionally shattered. Apocalypse humiliates him by pinning his head beneath his foot and, instead of killing him, tells him he's so weak that he isn't even worth the effort, essentially comparing him to nothing more than an ant. I think this moment strikes directly at Charles Xavier's pride, and I have a feeling it could profoundly shape his character moving forward. Later, Bishop returns to rescue Charles and bring him back to the present, bringing Apocalypse's origin story to a close. What I love most about this storyline is its central idea. Apocalypse's rise is inevitable. No matter how hard the characters try to change history, they always end up causing the very future they were trying to prevent. In other words, Apocalypse will always exist because his destiny simply can't be avoided. Overall, I absolutely loved this episode, and at this point I honestly consider it one of the best in the series. Even though Magneto appears to have died, I can't shake the feeling that he'll eventually return, perhaps through a storyline involving Onslaught, or another narrative twist that explores the psychological consequences of his sacrifice. Before wrapping up, I also want to talk about the post-credit scene, because it was easily one of the biggest surprises of the episode. We see Wolverine in Paris meeting with Captain America and Black Widow, both wearing their classic comic-inspired costumes. Personally, I loved Black Widow's classic design. There's also a very important detail about Logan. He still has his bone claws, confirming that this is the same Wolverine we've been following throughout the series, and that this scene takes place in the past. Another interesting detail is that Wolverine mentions he has a team. I can't help but wonder if he's referring to X-Force, or maybe even a group of X-Men involved in events connected to the Weapon X program. At the same time, this episode has already shown us that changing the past is nearly impossible because certain events are simply destined to happen, no matter how hard anyone tries to rewrite them. Finally, we already know the next episode is titled Weapon X Lies and DVD, a clear callback to the classic episode from the original animated series, Weapon X Lies and Videotape. Based on the title alone, I think the story will once again focus on one of Wolverine's defining traits: his manipulated memories, the trauma he's carried for years, and the Weapon X program that turned him into the mutant we all know today. I also expect we'll uncover new secrets about Logan, and I'm especially looking forward to breaking down everything the episode leaves unsaid and exploring what it could mean going forward, particularly if Wolverine ends up taking center stage.